Okay, we'll get started. Welcome, everybody, to SEMA Connects on this lovely Thursday. I'm Sandra Marcus. I recently joined SEMA as the Vice President for Strategy and Operations, and it is my great honor to be part of this conversation today. So before we get going, before I introduce our guests, I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts about authenticity. So the title of today's session is Leading with Authenticity. And there's a really famous, iconic play written by an iconic playwright named Henrik Ibsen called A Doll's House. And it happens to be on Broadway in Manhattan right now. It's a late 19th century piece. And for a while, it was referenced as a feminine piece, but there's kind of a more modern day take on it that is perfect for our topic. So it's the story of a woman who's living a life of deceit. She doesn't recognize herself. She feels that she's playing a part and behaving within a system, not being her authentic self, for fear of not being granted certain privileges or rights, or my take on this, or opportunities. So I use this today to introduce the session, and more importantly, to introduce what I would say are our iconic guests from iconic companies who will talk about their points of view and their experiences leading with authenticity. So with that, I would like to introduce Monique Ruff-Bell, who's the head of events at TED, and Erica Speed, the manager of live programming at Forbes. So before we get started with a bunch of really interesting questions, Monique, I will ask you to just give us a little bit of background about what your role is, what you do.
Sure. So, hi, everyone. So happy you're able to join us. So I am the head of global events for TED. And what that basically means is any type of flagship conference event, virtual event, member event, my team manages that, and I manage the strategy for that. Now, I just want to give a little context around TED and TEDx, because I know many people are familiar with seeing TEDx much more than TED. And so TEDx is our licensing volunteer program, a little bit separate from TED, meaning that anybody could apply to be a volunteer to host a TED-like event in their city. They are 100% volunteer. They cannot make any profit from that event, and they just do it for the love of TED. And so we have thousands and thousands of people that host TEDx events all around the world who are our volunteers. I manage all corporate-led TED events, which is about 3 to 4 per year, as well as some of our virtual offerings and membership events. And so I have been in the events industry for over 20 plus years, from doing very large trade shows to doing these wonderful branded events. And so happy to join this conversation and kind of share my background.
That's great. Thanks, Monique. And Erica, same. Tell us a little bit about your background and what you do at Forbes.
It's always such a hard question to answer. Every day is just so different. As we are event professionals, we know that there's no, monotonous kind of routine that happens with our day. But in a nutshell, I kind of like to look at myself as an event producer at Forbes. And so we run all different types of events, everything from small salon dinners to large scale summits, which we call our tent poles, where like our Power Women Summit or our 30-50 Women Summit that we had in Abu Dhabi earlier this year, where there's hundreds and hundreds of people that come to the event. And so on a day-to-day basis, I'm either working with our editorial team, or I'm working just kind of more independently on sourcing speakers and creating content and just kind of creating an event experience for whatever target market it is that we are wanting to serve. So I like it because it's really creative and there's never a dull moment. You're dealing with lots of different people. I'm sure we'll get into the context of like my love of people a little bit later, but my background has been everywhere between working from nonprofit to for-profit, and working in radio, and to kind of, I guess, coming full circle back to media within the Forbes spectrum. But looking forward to this conversation and kind of delving a little bit more into it.
Thank you. I'm laughing because I think I love working with different kinds of people, and every day is different and you never know what's about to happen. All of us event marketers, that's code language for we can live on the sort of blistering sharp edge of the knife, right? That fine line between harmony and chaos. With that, and sorry, one other thing I just wanted to say, I feel like I was with you in Abu Dhabi. Without any of us getting into a political conversation, I do watch MSNBC often, and therefore I felt like I was with you in Abu Dhabi. So every leader and every leadership journey looks different, I'm sure, even though I can't see everybody. I'm sure you're shaking your heads up and down, yes. And the spaces that we create for our teams, or frankly, for the people we work for, also are unique. So we're going to dive in here and understand from these ladies what their personal journeys have been like, thinking about how they bring easy for me to say, how they bring authenticity to their leadership roles. So we're going to start with Monique, and then Erica, I'll come to you in a couple of minutes, but talk a little bit about your journey to date, and just hold for a split second longer. I'm getting over my skis. So I decided I wanted to look up and just get a really basic kind of Merriam-Webster dictionary style definition of authenticity. So we use the word all the time. And I don't know anybody would think about whether they could define it on the SATs. I thought I would have a hard time. So authenticity is when your actions, his, hers, their actions are congruent with his, her, or their values, despite external pressure for social conformity. I thought that was pretty powerful, right? Sets the ball on the tee for us about self and confidence and trust and voice and representation, which we'll start to talk about here. So now with that, Monique, tell us a bit about your leadership journey.
Sure. So I know we hear often about bring your authentic self to work, be authentic consistently and constantly, but authenticity can be a risk. It is truly a choice. And so for me, I did not grow up in environments where anybody helped me to navigate how I'm supposed to be in corporate environments. We didn't have those conversations. You know, my family was more about survival than it was about growth. And so I had to learn all of how to navigate something as a 21-year-old, first having my first big job on my own. And when you go through these different spaces, you kind of watch and learn. And 9 times out of 10, you're not necessarily feeling comfortable, especially as a Black woman in these spaces. Not necessarily, I didn't start out feeling comfortable about my authenticity. And so becoming authentic really was a choice of survival for me, because mentally it was a strain to consistently and constantly bring this representative to work every day, all day, and really think about how I'm supposed to act and what I'm supposed to say. And I want to make sure people see that I do a good job. And what does that look like? What is the language I'm supposed to use? And constantly just repeating over and over again and just playing these scripts in my head and being overwhelmed by it and pretty much being exhausted by it. And so before I even became a leader, I had to make a choice as if my survival was going to be in these type of corporate spaces, could this non-authentic person last? And to me, my answer was no. It was going to be a mental struggle for me to keep putting this representative forth every day, all day. And then I saw an example of these people having this really authentic argument in front of me, and I'm thinking they're going to get fired. And then the next day they came back to work and they were perfectly fine. And I said, I'm done. You know, whatever I am, they're going to have to deal with. And I have to be okay with being uncomfortable, that being my authentic self may be a risk. Now, I had a lot of positives. I was a very high performer. I was a good worker. I really cared about what I was doing. I really came to the table with ideas. So I really felt good in what I was doing every day. And I had to be okay and lean into that. And so I look at leadership as in, I'm getting people comfortable with the fact that you can bring your authentic self to work. You do have value, you do have a voice that we can take and learn from or navigate something that could be very positive. But for me, it wasn't about building confidence when I first decided I wanted to be more authentic. It was more about I was exhausted from not being authentic.
Thank you. And just for everybody's benefit, we each were able to have a chat a couple of days ago in preparation for today's session. And I introduced the words about, or not the words, the concept of confidence. And Monique just turned it around, obviously, as you heard, that at some point you decide, and clearly you've just conveyed that to us, I can do certain things with my energy. I can't do everything with my energy. So thanks for sharing that. I'm going to pivot to Erica, and I'm going to use the phrase lived experience, because clearly no two people's lived experience related to anything, but in particular here about authenticity, will be the same. So Erica, talk a little bit about your journey to date, and we'll get to this in a little bit, but your leadership roles for our two guests, their leadership roles within their organizations are different, but we'll get there in a moment. But talk a little bit about your journey.
My journey has been, excuse me, really interesting as I kind of go back and look at like how I've arrived at where I am and just my comfortability, like in what I define as leadership for me, like these, I guess this particular day and time. Like I remember, I guess in the thought process of authenticity, just being a little girl loving Oprah Winfrey and just loving how she would just kind of show up, and just be kind of a leader, like within her own way of just, just all of her openness. There's no other word to really kind of describe it, like, and when just kind of just being enamored with that. So I think that's how I really kind of fell in love with the world of media and wanting to kind of be like within the media space and really wanting to kind of impact communities and people in intentional ways. And so when I went back, when I was in college, my first, I guess, leadership role was I used to be a promotion director for our campus radio station. And so I really loved that. I love, like, I always, like, I'm a big social person. I love kind of galvanizing people together and kind of putting together events. So that was where I guess kind of my love of events kind of, I guess, grew from there. And so post college, I did several different things. I went back to radio, where I worked for Radio One and for Clear Channel for several years. Started off as a promotion coordinator, then graduated to promotion director when I was leading teams, learned about myself and how I feel about leading teams, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well. And then I went into the nonprofit space where I worked for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, and I was focused more so like on the multicultural aspect of like leadership and kind of what that looked, being like an amplifier of diverse voices and just kind of helping to create events, like, and to get people to kind of see a different space of the nonprofit space within events and kind of doing that. And then from there, I went into two of my favorite jobs. One was like a lifestyle director for a luxury rental property. And so with that, I was charged with creating events for like all these different people from different walks of life that lived in this community space, and just kind of creating moments of, impact and like excitement for people that lived in this space. And I found that, like, that was my sweet spot, really kind of getting to know what people desire. And like when people take off their mask and just you look at people just as humans, like how can you connect with people that way? And so then my journey to like authenticity kind of grew from like within that as well. And then did something similar with a social club. And then I also had started my own events company and boutique agency, which I still kind of do a little bit here and there, but mostly my full-time job takes up most of the time so I really should stop saying that. But did a lot of contract work and doing different things within that. And then landed at Forbes about, I guess, almost 3 years ago, and started off as a contract employee there, and then was brought on full time in October 2020 to lead the programming for that. So that's kind of my journey, but there's a thread that I see of just kind of like being intentional about the spaces that I put myself in and really kind of having room to be creative. And I learned I don't like to be micromanaged. Like that was something that was like really, really important to me, and just really kind of being in spaces that weren't so corporate. You grow up, as you're little, thinking that you should have like certain things to be successful. You should have this corporate job, corner office, and different things like that. And then as I kind of grew, I kind of found my own ways into what success and happiness looks like for me, and like what my value points are. So that's a little bit of my journey into how I got into where I am now.
So interesting, and I'm scribbling furiously, so I remember things that I want to go back to. In the body of what each of you just shared with us, we all heard lots. There are a couple of things that I wanted to pull on. I was going to talk about whether it was necessary to have a leadership mentor eventually. I think instead of that, what I heard was seeing other people in leadership roles, people who resonated with you, their style resonated with you, maybe they looked like you, maybe the body of work they did appealed to you. Let's take those ideas about the environment that maybe stimulated you, and then what you do for the team that you lead. I'm going to go to Monique first, and then we're going to pivot because we made a mention about how each of these ladies' leadership roles are very different. So Monique, you, for lack of a better way to describe it, you run a fairly good sized organization. You've got responsibility, right? Broad span of control. What do you do as a leader to create those safe spaces, the safe environment where people feel like they have a choice to be who they are, that they can take the risk to truly be their authentic self under your guidance?
Well, what is kind of privileged about my role is I am the head of events, but I'm also part of the executive committee for the organization. So I play a part in making decisions for the entire organization of TED. TED is a nonprofit. A lot of people don't know that. TED does more than just TED Talks. We have different streams of businesses that people don't know. And so having that privilege is I get to see something beyond just my group of 44. I manage a team of 44 people. And really kind of making sure that not only my people have a space to be authentic, the people who work at TED have a space to be authentic, and how do I help feed into shaping what that looks like for the entire organization. And so for me, I always tell people who are coming up within this industry, don't just worry about managing up. You have to 100% understand how to manage down. And that is a skill set in understanding how to manage that. Because people who are leaders, a lot of them think people just have to cater up to your team, has to cater up to you. And that's not necessarily the case, because if I'm trying to get the best quality, the best service, the best execution, I need to understand how my team members tick. I need to understand what I need to say and what I need to do to inspire and motivate. And I don't need them to be worrying about other stuff that's unnecessary. So if you are coming to work and you can't be comfortable, then you're going to be worried about all these other things because you feel like you have to do that. And that's going to take away your productivity to worry about the things that matter. So I always start with a baseline of 80-20 rule here. I said, number one, I'm happy with risk. You have an idea, it's going to be something different. It may or may not work. Bring it to me. Because 80% of the time, it probably will. And if 20% it doesn't, we'll learn from it and we'll do something better or different from it. So don't think you have to have the line of perfectionism when it comes to dealing with me, because I'm not that. And so here's the space for you not to be that either. Number two, I know you are working hard. I assume people are coming to the table to work hard, then they're not working hard. Until you show me you're not, I assume that you are. So what type of resources do I need to continue to keep providing for you so that you can continue to be a high performer and do your best work? So my whole thing is, and the way that I speak to a Jennifer on my team is very different than I speak to a James, because James hears things in a certain way that's very different than Jennifer. And so the only reason I would know that is because I have conversations, quarterly conversations, or a couple of times a year where it's just a one-on-one with me and my team. Now, I have leaders who manage this very large team, but I speak to everybody. I have one-to-ones with everybody because I need to understand what's my heartbeat and thread through my team. And what do I need to do to make sure that they're progressing and being high performers? So I'm constantly thinking about managing down. I have to think about managing up because I'm in a senior position, and that's a whole nother conversation separate from this one. But managing down is just as important to me because I have a team willing to do what it takes to be successful at what we do because I'm able and have that ability to understand what brings out the best of them.
Thank you. So lots of things in that too. I hear nothing replaces communication, right? You build and reinforce trust through your communication. Your communication antenna is up to understand who's an introvert, who's an extrovert, who's a data rich decision maker, who's an analytical decision maker, who's an anecdotal decision maker, or not that you make decisions based on anecdotes. Sorry, that was the most foolish thing I've said all day. But who processes with anecdote, who only processes with hard data? Really interesting. I'm going to make one other comment and then take it back to there's manage up, there's manage down. And I think maybe when we get to Erica, there's sort of how I manage across a broad organization. But before I do that, I only wanted to comment there's so much value in the style of appreciating that different people learn and respond to management, different management techniques. We talk about diversity, and once upon a time, maybe we talked about diversity of gender and then diversity of race, right? It's so much more broad now about diversity of thought and cognitive skills, truly. So I'm motivated to hear the way you just described yourself as a leader for your people. Erica, let's go to you. So just to kind of deliver on the plant that I offered a little while back, that you don't manage a team of people, but you nonetheless are a leader within the organization. And from the little bit that I know, have influence and impact in the organization. So talk a little bit about your role in engaging authentically with the various people across Forbes with whom you engage.
Well, for me, again, because there's no set day into how everything kind of rolls, like into, I guess, Forbes, but I'm going to kind of, before I kind of get into that, I'm going to kind of talk about like how I got into this mindset. Like I'm a bit of an empath, like in a little bit of an HSP too. So like I learned early on that like for me, I'm also a bit quirky in kind of how I deal with things, and I'm not super corporate. So I think early on, like I realized for me, climbing the corporate ladder wasn't necessarily something that I felt comfortable with because it didn't feel authentic to me in terms of being able to show up the most authentic way within a corporate setting. So as I sat with that and kind of thought about like how I want to kind of show up in different work environments that I'm in, I wanted to kind of think about like how I could be impactful utilizing the skill sets and talents that I have. And so as I was sharing a little bit earlier about my background, the community building part has been something that's really been important to me. And also just kind of making sure that different voices are heard that like aren't necessarily always heard. And so in every environment that I'm in, like I sit on our social team at Forbes, like where we put together different events for just the larger body of Forbes. And I get that's like a way that I have like leadership in there too. And so I like to kind of deal with people beyond the work. And so I like to kind of deal with people as humans and just kind of connecting with people in that way. So I really, and as I'm just kind of like sharing it and thinking, I think even like when I was doing that lifestyle director job, I kind of look for ways for me to kind of show up like that way in any work environment that I'm in. Well, how can I connect people, like, find a dot of connection with people in different ways that are meaningful, regardless of if they see nothing that they have in common. And so I love going to like other different events and just kind of like being like a sponge to kind of see like if there's like an interesting speaker that I think that might be good for an event that we have, somebody that other people may not have thought about because they've been in a tunnel vision another way. I like to kind of be like that outlier of like of thought to kind of bring in different voices and different ways to kind of see and do things. And so I feel like that gives me a little bit more flexibility and freedom, in the way in terms of how I lead and show up in the organization. Like for me, like when I managed a team of people when I was in radio, like the thought of just having to have these people report to me and have to do these different like one-on-one kind of things. So like I hated it because like I just don't like, I get so caught up in people's stories, and then it's just a hard line for me to kind of operate from in that style of leadership. So like I wanted to kind of seek ways and opportunities where I could kind of show up in a way that wouldn't limit my capability of growth within an organization, but that would amplify my way of connecting with people. And so I think that that's the way that I kind of show up in Forbes. Like when I go to different events, like I like to kind of like bring different ideas and different innovative thoughts of things that I may be inspired from, like to kind of leverage my quirkiness and different things of that nature into the space. And even like with my like being like a bit of an empath, like I'm always the type of person that like people from all different walks of life will come and tell me like their different stories. Like I can have headphones on, somebody on the subway is going to find a way to tell me like their life story and different things like that. But I just kind of learned that that's like a gift for me. And Monique doesn't know this, but I used to, when I first moved to New York, I used to be really active in the TEDx New York salons. And then I was on the organizing team for that. And one of my favorite things that I got from there was like being a soft space for hard conversations. And I think that that's something that I really bring into like every space too. I like to kind of bring levity into the moments of things and just kind of bring connection between different variables and different people and different ideas. And so I think that that's kind of how I mostly kind of manage across in terms of how I show up within my role.
So much that I want to talk about. But first I'll say, I love the fact that you refer to yourself as quirky. I love that. This has nothing to do with today's conversation, but joining SEMA, was asked for my headshot, realized that I'm an adult now and my headshot looks like it was from when I was a child. So I'm going to get new ones done. And they asked me for 3 words to describe myself. I didn't use quirky, but I love the fact that you use quirky. So I've heard in the last couple of minutes, maybe more than a couple of minutes, levity, joy, success, and actually, I don't know if I heard happiness, but I wrote down happiness. So I'll start with you, Erica, and then I'm coming to you, Monique. Surprise, surprise. So when we met, the idea here is not to talk about work-life balance, right? We all manage everything that we want to do and be involved in very different ways. There's no, I don't think that this group would be looking for someone to give them ideas on how to achieve work-life balance. And that's not our focus today. But in being authentic in leadership, and presumably getting some joy and satisfaction and achieving whatever it is that you deem to be success in your role. Talk a little bit about your thoughts there, because I know you have some strong thoughts about weaving your personal and professional. So I could wag on for a long time. I'm going to stop and hand it to you.
I think like, as I think about like the values that are important to me, and especially even I've always been like this even before the pandemic, but I think the pandemic kind of provided a great awakening of sorts for people to kind of really have to deal with, what is important in their life. You could leave your job tomorrow, they're going to replace you right away. So I think a lot of times people like in their mind kind of put their job on such a pedestal, and you should definitely like what you do and enjoy what you do, because that's where you spend the bulk of your time. But you should also really kind of work towards making sure that you're living a life that you like as well. And so for me, just there's always like those studies of especially I guess within American culture, of people not taking their vacation times. That's never not going to be me, because I need that time to recalibrate. It allows me to kind of reset and just to kind of show up as my best self and work. And so I think when you show up as your best self, when you live a life that's authentic to you, and when you're just kind of cultivating things that kind of bring you joy in different ways, whether it's painting, if you're an artist in your side life, just making and carving out time and spaces for you to really kind of tap into those things that feed your soul. I think that's important to kind of bring into the workplace. And so like, even with that, like when I was sharing that I sit on the social committee, I'm like, what kind of like interesting things can I bring into like our events that we're bringing these for our larger body, we're doing next month, we're doing a potluck kind of event that's going to be like at our main space. And so we all kind of like thought together about like, what's an event, everybody loves food. So, food is like the great unifier in so many different ways. It opens up so many conversations, and that potluck is around about different cultures. So I think it's just kind of leveraging your passions, and finding a way to fuse those within your workspace. Like that's something that really authentically brings me joy. Like, everybody that knows me knows that I love travel. So even like when I'm blessed to be able to travel for work, I'll try to, I have different friends from all different parts of the world. Like I'll try to kind of connect with my friends there too, and just really try to maximize the moment of that, because I know, you work hard, and then, you play hard as well too, because life is so short. So I think just really kind of just keeping that at the top of my mind, and just really kind of tapping into those moments of where like, okay, Erica, you need to recharge, what can you do to kind of reset and recalibrate? Because I know that is when I will be my best work self as well. So I think that is kind of the impetus of like me really kind of making sure that, like, I know you don't like to use that phrase work-life balance, but like, I guess work-life integration, and like making sure that you're really living a life that really fuels you holistically from all different sides.
And that is the big takeaway for me, is knowing what sort of energy you need to put in to be authentic in what you deliver, right, to your team, to your colleagues, to your management, whatever it is, and doing it in a consistently energetic, high quality way versus the alternative, which I suppose would be burnout.
Yeah.
I had one other thing that went in and out of my head that I was going to respond to. Oh, I know what it was. Everybody loves food. I often say, that your relationship, you have a really well-established relationship with your colleagues, your team, your management, if you know how every person takes their coffee or whatever it is that they drink. I often have this conversation with people who have significant others or spouses or partners and ask, do you know how so-and-so takes their coffee? And sometimes you're met with a, God, you know what? I don't, but I could tell you how all my colleagues take their coffee. All right, let's come to Monique. Monique, talk a little bit about different, right? You've got people for whom you're responsible, and then obviously we all have people we're responsible to in our professional settings. Talk a little bit about the happiness, joy, the success that that you find in your leadership and your management.
I have always been a person that loved to be helpful to people. So from elementary school all the way through now, I have always been in some type of leadership position, either captain of the cheerleading team, or I was doing, one of the things for the plays, or I always had this thing where how I can be helpful and really move people along through success. And one thing that I can say about my life now is my work is not my identity. my identity benefits my work. And so what I mean by that is I come to the table in an authentic way as self, with boundaries, with how I define success, with a comfortability in being uncomfortable, with killing perfectionism, with certain things that I'm that Monique outside of work, and I do those same things. It is a benefit that my job gets that side of me because I care, I'm a high performer, I am helpful, I'm strategic, I like ideation. That's the Monique that's outside of work that I bring into work. So there's a benefit from my job that they get out of that. That is a joy for me that I don't have to code switch, bring my representative, do any of that. I can just be myself. And I see people not just surviving, but thriving in their roles because I clean pipes, I move things out of the way, I figure out what can be helpful from a resource standpoint. I'm a cheerleader, I'm a motivator. If they see I can do certain things, they feel comfortable with them doing it. That all creates happiness for what I do. So I have always been this way. I will always be this way. And as long as I get to stay this way when I'm at work, I will always be happy.
So interesting. I'm sitting here shaking my head up and down in violent agreement that we all have had times, and you hope that they're more often than not, where you are just at one with what you do, because you can be authentic. The way you behave on Saturday, using the conventional work week as the reference here, the way you behave on Saturday is the same as the way you behave on Tuesday or Wednesday, right? When the sun, the moon, and the stars are lined up so that you are at one with what you do is a true joy for you, for the people with whom you engage. So for the first time since we started, I don't have my exact next pivot. So give me a split second. And now I do have it. But before I do that, I see we've got 12 posts in the chat, which I haven't looked at yet. So for anybody, if you've posted something to me, I'm not ignoring you. I'll look eventually. And then we are going to get to a point where we ask for folks to chime in, and we're heading there. So Monique, let's stick with you. And I'm going to ask you this question, but I think I know the answer to this is no already. But has your leadership style changed over time? Or maybe what I should say, because I think the answer to that is no. I am who I am, and I've been who I've been once I made this decision, to be authentic. But what adaptations maybe have you deployed just based on whatever the circumstance or the conditions are surrounding you in your workplace?
I've definitely grown in understanding the psychology of the mind. I've definitely learned how to deal with very, very different personality types and really figuring out what's that special or secret sauce to get them to stay motivated and focused. You'll hear me always say focus, because there's just so many things in our business, in the events business, that could take you off focus, because there's so many little fires and blips and changes and things where you think you're going one way and you end up in another. So for me, really understanding how to get the best out of people has continued to grow for me. Another thing is the spaces that I'm in, being now as a part of the executive committee for the organization I wasn't that at my previous job. I was in a senior management, but I wasn't on that part of the spectrum from leadership. And now I'm in these spaces, and there is definitely a lot of other things that many, many people don't know or don't understand that goes on in those rooms, and really understanding how to navigate, play my part, and be a contributor is something that I'm getting more and more learning and evolving from, thinking that maybe I had to approach it one way, but learning maybe this other way is the best way to kind of do that. I think also I'm evolving in understanding that uncomfortability is a part of what we do. You are never going to go into an event 100% comfortable with all the decisions you have made, all the things that you have lined up. You are never going to feel like it's great or perfect until you come at the end of it. And so my thing is, when I go into finally the on-site experience is about to happen for these events, I go in with a sense of gratefulness. So I go in saying, wow, look what I get to do. This is so fun. Look what people get to experience because of all of the hard work that our team gets to do. There's going to be some fires. As long as they don't see it, it's all good in my book. You know, we'll deal with it after the fact, as long as we get to the end. And when we get to the end, to celebrate and actually sitting in the celebration, because we're always on to the next thing. That is an evolution for me, because before it was just move on to the next thing and not really just sitting in the celebratory nature of doing these really big and wonderful things. So I've constantly grown, I'm still growing, constantly evolving, and understanding people and leadership and how to provide the right motivation and resources to them.
And I would venture a guess, because of the environment you've created, the teams that you've built, when you get to that 80-20 of 80% is baked and super, and there's going to be 20% small fire drills, and it may not even be that. Let's go 90-10. I bet you know, right? I can rely on these people to deal because we have one another.
Right.
We trust one another because we've been real with one another.
Exactly.
It makes great sense. I'm sure you can see, even though the tiles of our faces are tiny, I'm smiling from ear to ear, kind of living in what you just described. Erica, how about you? Have you had to adapt, evolve, change? Any like moments that made you say, I'm going to approach this certain kind of thing in a different way, not an inauthentic way, just a different way?
Yeah, I think to Monique's point, I think life is just in general just about constant evolution and growth. And so I think you have to, regardless of what industry you're in, especially in events, we're constantly adapting to different things. So I think it's always kind of being in that growth mindset and just, realizing and knowing that far from perfect, always have room to grow and to learn and to, step myself up to the next level to become like my best self. And so I think for me, especially being, there's like so many different avenues I can go down trying to figure out which road I want to like go through. I think for me, like one of the big things for me is just like because my leadership style is more so just kind of not necessarily having a desire to lead teams, sometimes that can be a little bit challenging in the sense of like how you kind of like show up. So like having to delegate a little bit more, like when you need to, or like ask for help when you like need to, and not think that you like always like, got it, and just kind of like opening yourself up a little bit more. I know like the delegation part has been like something that I'm consciously kind of working on like this year, because I can be so set in my ways of how I want to kind of do something, like it has to be done this way, otherwise it's not going to get done, like, or, the way I want to do it. So like, just kind of being a little bit more relaxed about that, and just realizing that just like how I may do things differently, that doesn't mean that that's the only way that things can be done. And it's also kind of going back on that, like a team mindset, when you're part of a team, that like everybody really respects each other and like really, has that team mindset of like working towards the same goal. That makes a big difference as well too. And so just like, I've been in situations and organizations where I didn't necessarily feel as connected to the team that I do now at Forbes. And that's made a tremendous difference, like in terms of like how I show up at work, and even from like our VP of events, just like how she kind of leads and like kind of gives everybody, a certain level of autonomy and like trust, and just understands the different nuances of how people kind of show up and operate. And just really kind of like leaning into, just more of like that delegation, and just also kind of finding ways to challenge myself to not be complacent in thought as well too. Because sometimes it's easy to kind of, think like, oh, like I've always done this thing the same way. But sometimes with the routine of like how you do things also can kind of get to you too. So how can you, pivot into an organic and authentic way and still kind of like grow? That's like always something that I'm continuously working towards as well.
Thank you. And in a bit of what each of you said, or maybe I said this already, so I'll say, and in what you said, I still get that, not still get that, I also get that sense of the times when you're at one with what you do, it fits you and you fit it, they're a true joy, and you get paid.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do a plug here for SEMA Summit. I'm taking a wild guess that many people who are with us today are probably registered for SEMA Summit, but the plug is Monique said focus a couple of times, and one of our keynote speakers, I'll never ever get the title straight. I don't do off the top of my head well, but a keynote by a woman named Dr. Julie Williamson, I think I have her name right, about basically how you set a strategy and then every day you let yourself kind of get sucked down into the tactics. Like you've got to focus on making sure, right, that you lead with strategy every day. Focus first, deciding what you should focus on, right, and then maintaining that focus take incredible discipline. Last little bit, actually just a comment, not a question, and then I think we'll pepper the group with some questions and ask people to like open their microphones and shout out to us. I've probably thought this before, but maybe it didn't like kind of rise up as much until this dialogue, but ideation is core to growth. Ideation is core to creativity. And in order for people to be able to ideate, they need to feel safe. They need to feel like they have choice. They need to feel like risk is okay. You'll never raise your hand, or if you do raise your hand, maybe years ago, we were all conditioned to say, I have an idea that it might not be a good idea, right? You sort of disqualify it before it even gets over your lips. But in a safe space where your leader, right, has provided for you to be yourself, you could getting the word ideate out is not easy. You could ideate freely, and who knows what will come out of that. So this conversation just kind of made that come from the back of my mind to the front of my mind about how linked they are. So I thank you, ladies, for that. Let's do open kind of wild card, whatever you might want to say. Monique, I'll come to you, and then Erica to you. And then I think people can ask questions. I think we can all open our microphones. But Monique, anything else that you want to share with us that I didn't ask you to touch on?
Yes. So one thing when you're just talking about ideating, you need space for that. Our job is so time consuming with execution and tasks and checklists and, thinking about what you need to do next, that if your leader isn't giving you the space to be creative and to think differently, it's very hard for you to do that. So one of the things that I like to do, I have something called an all hands. And every month I do my own all hands with my entire team. And it's basically the foundation of this is, if this could have been an email, we're not discussing it here. And so if there is anything that could be shared in a document, in an email or whatever, this is not the place for it. What we do is we solve problems and we're solution oriented. So I'll go and give a high level update about the business, where we're at. That's 15 minutes. And then the rest of it, and sometimes these meetings are an hour, hour and a half once a month, we're figuring out something. I do something called What's the Big Bets? What are we doing or evolving or changing or adding to some of our programs that's different, that's unique? And everyone will break out into these mini groups. We don't have more than 5 to 6 people in here. Remember, my team is 44 people. And then they come back to the table with different ideas, and then we share ideas of what that is. And then we take a vote. And then we say, in the end, these are the 3 big bets we're going to explore for this particular program or event. We do that at our all hands every single month. A leader will bring a problem to solve that will all break out into breakout groups and try to come back with ideas to solve them. Like, we are really about being solution oriented. I hate meetings where someone is just kind of running down something that could have been an email. And so we really, if you don't give your team the space to think and dream and be creative, 9 times out of 10, you will rarely get that. So as a leader, give your team the space to do that.
I have a couple of brain knots that I'm going to give you for your next team meeting. Excuse me. Erica, how about you? Anything else that you want to share with the group that we didn't touch on yet?
I feel like we covered a lot. I guess some quick nuggets that I would I guess from just like alternative leading approach, leadership, like I guess thoughts. It's just this kind of ways if you find yourself not necessarily wanting to be like in one of those like key leadership roles, is there's ways just to kind of find like what you are passionate about in the organization and try to find a way to kind of lead from that angle. Like pick something super niche. Like I know I'm passionate about community. So the way in every organization I'm in, I'm always going to find a way to tap into building the community experience. And that's the way that I kind of show up in terms of like a leader. You can also just kind of live in a focus group mindset, like being a person where not so much a general, I guess kind of like a generalist for people to kind of bounce ideas off of. Like I found that's something that like I have really enjoyed like within my like leadership style, and just taking on leadership in non-conventional ways like ERG groups. If you're a person that doesn't necessarily like to manage people like on a day-to-day basis, like kind of look for other ways to kind of still have visibility within an organization, but then also to kind of embrace what feels authentic to you. So those were just some kind of nuggets that I wanted to kind of share.
And at the risk of stating the obvious, being involved in an ESG, clearly it's a thing that would be purely authentic. That is not a check it off the box kind of a engagement. All right. Forgive me for not knowing the answer to this, just because it's my first SEMA Connects. I think folks can take themselves off mute and ask questions. So maybe, how do we do that? We don't do, I guess, can we do hand raises? Is there anybody who would like to ask a question? Feel free.
Feel free to unmute yourself. Yes.
Thank you, Natalie.
I have a question.
I'm happy to ask a question. Can anyone hear me?
We can. Can you just forgive me because I don't see everybody's faces since we're looking at the mural. Can you just say who you are?
Sure. I'm Julie Clark from Levity.
Hi, Julie.
See everyone. So this is a question I have based on a past work environment, not my current work environment. So I just want to specify that first. So for the speakers, have you ever worked in a company where your real self has not been accepted, or you've been asked to adapt and change?
Yes.
And how have you worked through that?
I left.
Yeah, I did too.
Like, listen, I don't have the time if I've done all I can to make sure that we can come to a understanding about each other. And I feel like the culture is so like dealing with a statue, like you can't move it, so unmovable. It's not the culture for me. And I'm okay with knowing that there is a risk to authenticity, and knowing that I have to be okay with moving to spaces to make me feel comfortable. And if I'm in a space that doesn't make me feel comfortable, I have to go. My loyalty is to me. Like I said, the company gets the benefit of who I am.
Yeah.
And so it's not the other way around. And so if I'm not feeling comfortable in that space, I'm going to move on to something else.
Yeah, I love what you said just about how your identity, hold on, I wrote it down and it was in one of the notes too. My work is not my identity. And what you just said, my loyalty is to me, because I think there are times when we're put in situations where, you know, for lack of a better word, we feel a little persecuted and we're willing to acquiesce and kind of meet the corporate standards, but if it's just such a fundamental change, that's what I wanted to hear. It's like, have you been in that situation and what did you do?
I'm validating you.
Yeah, thank you. I need a whole therapy session with you. I'll follow up with you later.
I second that sentiment as well too. I left as well too. I'm very big on like being spaces where I feel welcomed and where I feel like I can like show up as myself. And I'm very big on not leaving if it's not the spot for me.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. Oh, and now I can see you. Thank you for the question.
Thanks.
And it's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you guys too. And this is once again not my current company that
Understood.
I have interaction, because my boss is also on this webinar.
Understood. And this
We all get it.
right. And this is a safe space within our community.
Yes. Yes.
I think it sounded like somebody else was starting to speak at the time that you asked your question. Anybody else want to ask a question? All right. Well,
I think that was me. I was just gonna jump in, and I know that
Oh,
we
sure.
have like 2 minutes
ahead.
left, but I always love asking these questions to people in different fields, right? Have you dealt, or do you still deal with bouts of the dreaded imposter syndrome? And in order to, continue to be your authentic self, what have you been done? What have you done if those moments have arisen for you?
I'll quickly answer that. I may have to drop off because I have a 2 p.m. meeting, but I will say, like, I think that's something like I still deal with like to this day. And I think it's just like one of those things you kind of have to constantly push yourself against. And, I think it's good to have a good support team of friends and like your cabinet of people that are there to kind of lift you up and like to making sure that you have a good like support system of people where you can just really be your authentic self and just kind of share when you're feeling those moments as well too. And you have your own little cheerleaders that will pump you up, and just realizing that, at the end of the day, people are people. So like where people may look like they have everything together, everybody has issues, regardless. Some people mask it a little bit better than others. And just like realizing when I kind of take myself back into that headspace and realizing that there's no perfect people that are out in the world. Everybody's going to make mistakes. I'm not going to be the first or the last to make a mistake, and just kind of embracing that and just knowing that like, my intentions are good and from a well-intended place, and just kind of showing up the best authentic way that I can with that, and just kind of letting that lead my way.
I
Thank
think
you.
for me,
Go
sorry.
ahead. Go ahead. I was going to ask you.
I have to jump off at 2 too.
Mhm.
I think for me, I've been in so many spaces where I question how other people got there that I'm like, I don't have the imposter syndrome. What I have is I need to learn how to navigate the spaces I'm in. So I have the shut your mouth, listen, understand what's happening around you syndrome, and figuring it out, and then figuring out how I'm going to contribute to that space. And so I might not automatically or quickly contribute to the space because I'm learning how to navigate it, but I'm not feeling like I don't belong there, because I've seen too many people who shouldn't be in some of these spaces And I'm like, if they here, I'm here too. We could take it from that point, but yeah.
Oh, what a priceless place to end. So I'll pick up on your word, listen. It's been a delight and a pleasure and an honor to listen to what each of you have had to say today. I know that I speak for the whole group. And with that, we'll wrap up. Thank you so much. Lots to take away. And everybody enjoy the rest of your lovely Thursday.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was
Really
great.
fun.